Good morning, students and staff of the Institute of Ismaili Studies and the Aga Khan University's Institute for the Study of Muslim Civilisations. Distinguished guests joining us both in person and online, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second annual IIS AKU-ISMC Graduate Conference. My name is Nour Mansoor, a GPISH student here at the IIS, along with my co-conveners, Zainab Nekokar from the ISMC and Nabila Ismail from STEP. We are excited to host you here in this beautiful space of the Aga Khan Centre London. We look forward to a day of insightful discussions that will contribute to advancing our understanding of the challenges facing Muslim societies.
It gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Shahzad Bashir. Dr. Shahzad Bashir comes to ISMC and AKU following 2 decades of leadership experience at universities in the United States. He has served as the Aga Khan Professor of Islamic Humanities and Professor of History and Religious Studies at Brown University since 2017. While at Brown, Dr. Bashir directed the Center for Middle East Studies and established the Islam and the Humanities Research Project. Previously, Dr. Bashir was a faculty member at Stanford University for 10 years, serving as the Lisbeth Warren Anderson Professor in Islamic Studies and director of the Sohib and Sara Abbasi Program in Islamic Studies. Dr. Bashir's scholarly work covers Islamic history and thought in the Middle East and South and Central Asia over many centuries. He received his BA summa cum laude from Amherst College and his PhD from Yale University. The author of 5 books and over 40 articles, Dr. Bashir's most recent book is an open access, multimodal digital monograph entitled A New Vision for Islamic Pasts and Futures. His earlier published work has focused on understandings of time, poetry, the human body, Sufism, and Shiism. He is currently working in 2 areas: an extended argument for using anamorphic aspects of photography to theorize how we understand and narrate the past, and a cultural history of India during the period 1750 to 1850, deriving from a vast corpus of material that has been received little attention to date. As in his previous work, Dr. Bashir's new projects correlate between literary evidence in many languages, material culture in the form of art and the built environment, and humanistic and social scientific theories and methods. Dr. Bashir is the recipient of numerous prestigious U.S. academic fellowships for his work, including the American Council of Learned Societies, the Carnegie Corporation, Einstein Center Kronoi, the John Simon Guggenheim Foundation, the Mellon Foundation, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the Stanford Humanities Center. In 2020, he received Brown University's Presidential Faculty Award. In addition to his own research, he edits the book series Islamic Humanities, co-edits the series Islamic Intellectual History, and serves as an associate editor of the flagship journal History and Theory, Studies in the Philosophy of History. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Shahzad Bashir.
Thank you very much. Very, very kind introduction. I think you have introductions like this and various types of things that happen in an event like this. There's a ritualistic element to this, obviously. And I have a feeling that, especially after the experience of the past 5 years, technological tinkering is part of this ritual as well. So we underwent that as well. So I'm really glad that everything is working together. So first of all, congratulations to and thank you to Nour, Nabila, and Zainab for asking me to do this, and also for doing the whole event and putting these things together. It looks like a really spectacularly good conference. It's my pleasure to open it together with also representing Zain, who will be coming later in the day. Now, one of the things is that this is the second conference for graduates and graduate students. The first time around, it's a beginning. Second time around, it means it's a tradition. So in a way, by doing it the second time, they have created a burden for students to come. So please beware. This will have to be repeated. And it is a wonderful thing to repeat because coming from ISMC and being in the AKC, I think one of the crucial things is, as we go forward with the future of both institutions, is to actually connect them in all possible ways. And the lovely thing about this conference is that it's not actually bridging across the institutions, it's amalgamating them together. And this is, in a way, a model going forward for other types of endeavors that we should undertake so that AKU-ISMC and IIS develop a closer relationship going forward. So it's a special pleasure then that students are actually leading the way in making this happen. And hopefully we as the faculty administrators will follow. So I will say just a brief word in terms of the topic of the conference and looking at the paper titles. So first of all, just to remark on the diversity of viewpoints represented in terms of geographies that are being addressed in terms of time periods from the medieval to the modern, as well as different types of different disciplines that are being invoked as well. So even though it's one-day conference, if one looks at the coordinates on all these matters between the papers, we have a vast kind of perspective that is presented relating to all the different types of things that are undertaken by both IIS and ISMC. So it's really a very, very impressive conference in this way. And I hope that it provides something for everyone, depending on whatever might be one's specific interest. But one of the nice things about conferences like this is that those who are encountering a topic or an area of the world or a time period for the first time, it actually ends up being an introduction as well, because of the intermixture of various types of things that is there. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the different things that will come up. Now, the four panels are dealing with crucial issues: identity, representation, power, and intellectual history. Those are the four things that are here. One of the crucial things here also from my purposes is that the topics that are being discussed, they're not actually specific to Muslim context. Of course, what we will be dealing with is Muslim context and looking at challenges with respect to Muslims. However, we are talking about entirely universal things. All of these things that will come up. And so it's also a way, as addressed in this conference, is a way to deprovincialize the study of Islam and Muslims, to engage them in a global and universal perspective. So I think in terms of the actual practice that is happening here, as well as the topics that are covered, and the immense amount of work that has gone into it on the part of the students, this really is a kind of model event as far as I'm concerned, in terms of how we want to come out across to the world. So thank you and all the very best, and really, really looking forward to the event.
Thank you, Dr. Bashir. Your words inspire us all and hopefully the future students to come as well. Next, we have our first panel on identity and making space, chaired by Dr. Leila Halani, who is a returning panel chair from last year and the head of the Department of Graduate Studies at the IIS. We will be having presentations by Mashal Gilani, Akil Bisram, who was our predecessor who ran the conference last year, and he will be joining us online from my home country in Canada, and Farhan Ali, who is the Dr. Daftary PhD scholar, and he will be here in person with us. So without further ado, if I can invite the panelists and the panel chair to come on up, please.
So without further ado, our first speaker, Mashal.
Thank you so much. So my presentation, as you can see, is on navigating identities. How do queer Smileys in New York understand their identity in relation to the Jamat? And the reason that I chose this topic was because there is very limited research on queer Muslims themselves. Often, when they are studied, they're either fetishized or perceived as atheists who are escaping their oppressors, or they are seen within the binaries of either seen as religious and oppressed, or within religious communities and oppressed, or as liberal and westernized. So, in order to bridge that gap, in order to also add to the research or create research on queer Smileys, I chose this topic. So, how it's going to work is that we're going to see a bit more of the introduction, we're going to do the research questions, and then the methodology, and then the findings and the recommendations. The recommendations specifically have been included here because they came from queer Smileys themselves. So, I think it's essential that we have those recommendations. So the introduction. The research obviously focuses on the intersection of gender, sexuality, and religion among queer Smileys. Intersectionality is a broad topic that I'll discuss in just a bit, but the three main aspects of a person's identity that I've taken into account are their gender, sexuality, and religion. Within the research itself, I did take multiple other identities such as their immigration status, their education, and etc. But for the purposes of this presentation, to keep it short, only these three markers are taken into account. The research is set within the context of the Smiley community in New York. However, a lot of the challenges or the findings that came up apply to broader queer Muslims as well. And the research attempts to uncover the nuanced ways in which queer Smileys balance their personal authenticity with communal belonging. The theoretical frameworks frame how the research was taken into account, how the people's personal lived experiences was taken into account. The first and foremost is intersectionality. Intersectionality attempts to understand how different aspects of a person's identity enhances or shapes their human experience in the everyday world. So, for this research, again, we're focusing on the different aspects such as gender, sexuality, and religion. Queer theory is essential here as well because again we're studying queer Smileys, and queer theory challenges heteronormativity as the norm, which is often taken which is often taken as the norm or as the only way of life, even in Western societies. And then lastly, community making, which is essential, especially for queer Smileys and queer people as counter publics, as Nancy Fraser phrases it, to understand how people from different backgrounds need space for themselves. Then we have the conceptual frameworks. This frame the ways in which people who live in New York, where Smileys are living in New York. It is queerness in Islam. So, how is queerness understood within Islam? A lot of research, recent research, is done on queer Muslims, focuses on their lived experiences, which is this research as well, or a reinterpretation of, I'm sorry, a reinterpretation of Islamic texts. Works such as that of Scott Kugel, Asifa Siraj, or Umar Minwala are really essential in that regard. However, again, Scott Kugel is a white man, so that should be taken into consideration. And lastly, because queer Smileys live as American Muslims, how American Muslims understand queerness is also essential. Situating the identities in that context is essential as well. So Rayside points out that American Muslims often view queerness similarly to how Protestant Christians in America view it, which is a very conservative belief. Moreover, the Islamic Society of North America has labeled homosexuality a sin, a moral disease, and a corruption. So that is the context in which queer Smileys in America are situated. The question itself is how do they understand their identity, with a focus on how they participate in community life, how they understand their acceptance from Jamati members, and how they perceive their own sense of belonging within the Jamaat. The research was done using qualitative research methods, so semi structured interviews and a participant observation. 7 people were interviewed. Of those, 5 were bisexual women, 1 gay man, and 1 trans woman. I have collectively phrased them as queer Smileys, but these are their self identifiers. They were all aged between 21 and 34. They had been in NYC for about 3 to 9 years, so enough time for them to familiarize with themselves with the Smiley community and the queer community in New York. They attended either Manhattan Jamat Khana or Queens Jamat Khana, and they were all South Asian of first or second generation descent. Um, I would like to point out, since snowball sampling method was used, it did lead to a homogenized group, which is people of South Asian descent. And then the findings. The first major finding was that there is a difference between the culture and the religion itself. Often, cultural restrictions were seen as more restrictive and more binding than the religion itself. People reported attending Jamaat Khanas, or the places of worship, only occasionally and only for their parents, not for themselves. When they went to Jamaat Khana, they felt isolated, disconnected, and like they socially did not belong. They also felt a sense of disengagement from the Jamaat. A lot of them had been active participants in the Jamaati life when they first moved to New York, but as isolation grew, they disconnected from the Jamaat altogether. A lot of people, when asked how they identify, refer to themselves as spiritually and culturally smiley. One person went on to say that she believes in God, but she doesn't trust God. Another person who is in the process of converting to Judaism mentioned how, while finding God had been liberating for her, she feels more welcome at the temple than at the Jamaat Khana, because she can find the mysticism aspects of Smileyism that she loves about Smileyism in Judaism as well, without any of the judgment. Secondly, a lot of participants, similar to their queer Muslim counterparts, admitted to living dual lives or compartmentalizing their different identities according to different social situations. So, for example, of the 5 bisexual women that were interviewed, only four said that they would never come out to their parents because of fear of isolation or being abandoned by their family. 3 mentioned how they actively try to stop themselves from developing feelings for people of the same gender, because they know that if that they do that, if they fall in love with someone of the same gender, they will lose their family, and they were not willing to do that. This is the Muslim closet that leads to stress, mental health issues, anxiety, and depression, which was seen in all of the participants. One of the participants, who's in a relationship with a same sex person, mentioned how she wished to attend Jamaat Khana with her partner to celebrate religious occasions as freely as heterosexual couples can, but feared that she could not do so because of fears of, again, isolation and being disconnected from her family. Then we have um, the perceived generational difference in acceptance. So many members that were interviewed had this perceived sense that the younger Jamaati members are more accepting than their older counterparts. And when asked who the younger generation and who the older generation is, the younger generation was often defined as people in their teens to their 20s, and the older generation as people in their 40s and above. Um, However, this perceived openness was not applicable to everyone who belonged to the younger generation, because, for example, one of the participants mentioned that while a member of the younger generation had become a leader in the Jamaat Khana, she believed that he had done so for the position, not to create a safe space. So there is still a disconnect between queer Smileys and their younger counterparts, and how accepted they feel within the Jamaat. And then we move on to intersectional identities of the Jamaat, how the Jamaati members' own intersectional identities affect how they perceive queer Smileys and how accepting they are. So within New York, or within the greater US, where they are based in, their time spent in the US, their education, and their gender all have influence on how accepting they are. So southwestern US, including Texas and Florida, are seen as not within the Jamaat themselves, but also in the greater American community, seen as less accepting than northeastern US, which includes New York. Within New York, Manhattan, as the young professional Jamaat Khana, is seen as more accepting than Queens Jamaat Khana, which has young families and the older generation. immigrant families as well, and like the lesser time you spent in the US is considered a hindrance to acceptance of queer Ismailis because of immigrant families' needs to preserve their beliefs of their homeland. And then women are seen as more accepting than their male counterparts, especially young mothers. And then lastly, there is a need to build communities for queer Smileys who are open and willing to come out. Um, of the 7 participants that were interviewed, only 2 knew one other queer Smiley in their Jamaat Khana. 5 of them believed that they were the only queer Smiley in their Jamaat Khana, and none of the 7 participants knew each other. So, one of the participants who knew another queer Smiley was relating how he felt seen in the lived struggle of another queer Smiley's hardships, and he wished that he could feel represented instead in their happiness and in their joyous life. So there's a need to build communities for queer Smileys so that they can feel represented and accepted. And lastly, we have the recommendations. So again, these recommendations came from the participants themselves. Firstly, institutional support. While they recognize that the Smiley community lives in various broader social political contexts, and an act of support may be accepted in one part of the world but not in another, they also recognize that individual efforts by Jamaat Khanas are possible, and that led to the point on visible allyship and how there is a difference between performative action and empty words and empty gestures. For example, examples were given of how in Manhattan Jamaat Khana, the ex-Mukhanima had worn Pride socks during Pride Month, or had rainbow cupcakes during Pride Month, or arranged for a tour of the Greenwich Village, which is the queer headquarters of New York, during Pride Month. So these actions do not force the queer Smileys to come out, but instead tell them that the Jamaat is open and willing to accept them should they feel comfortable enough to come out. Thirdly, educational reform. Of the participants who went through the STEP program, all of them reported that they felt comfortable enough talking to their STEP teachers or in their STEP classes about gender, sexual identity, and religious beliefs. But they did not feel comfortable coming out to their step teachers because they still feared that they would be judged and outed to their parents. So it is essential that step teachers who are trained in this building themselves are trained with pastoral care so that their students feel comfortable enough in coming out to them and feeling safe with them. Lastly, counseling services. So the Access Help Desk is an help desk available to every Smiley across the world. However, none of the participants knew about it. The Access Help Desk also provides counseling services, helps with financial information or advice on domestic abuse and violence for people who might be facing that in their homes. This is essential for younger youth who fears coming out to their parents or fears financial abandonment or domestic violence from their families. So greater access to the Access Help Desk is essential as well. And then lastly, community building or establishing safe spaces for members of the Jamaat who are again open and willing to come out so that there is representation for younger queer Smileys who are still questioning their identity or feel like they're the only ones in their Jamaat Khana who are doing so. And that is it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mashal, for a very fascinating talk. Move to our next speaker, Farhan Ali. So, Farhan, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm a bit nervous, especially because my colleagues have set the bar a bit too high for me. So please bear with me as I get started. Okay. So today I'm going to be talking about, the topic is shifting places, or how bodies expand the boundaries of Bhittai shrine. My research is on the shrine of Bhittai in Sindh, and today I'll be talking a bit about what I found. I haven't been to the field yet, so I'm talking about a paper I wrote when I was doing my previous master's. So the agenda for my presentation is, first of all, I'll give a brief introduction about Bhittai and the shrine. I'll talk about what I'm doing with this presentation and of course, the crux of this presentation. I'll review my findings and I'll present some conclusions that I've drawn after having written that paper. So, starting with the saint himself, Shah Abdul Latif, who was active around somewhere early 18th century. So the image you see here, very typical of iconographical style of representing saints sitting under a tree with a tasbih in their hand, have some books on the side, which is, it's a lot of people have said that these books are Quran and Masnavi of Rumi. He was very fond of these two things, and a lot of his work is based on that. The tree you see here is where he's allegedly sat under, and a lot of wish threads or mannat dhabi as they call it are attached to these trees. The saint has, scholars have said that the saint wandered the region. What region? Well, that's Pakistan and India. This is the border, and the saint was moving around this region. So there were no borders back then, so he was freely moving around this region. The good times, basically. He composed poetry in the vernacular of the region, not just the language, but also poetic medium, the metaphor, the style, the emotions he's talking about were basically of the region itself and of that time. And a lot of his work has proximity to Vaishnava literature, mostly the poetry of Kabir Das. And a lot of singers now, Qawwali singers, basically put his poetry and Kabir Das' poetry together when they're singing, especially in the Rajasthani and Thar region of both India and Pakistan. And as Professor Asani has noticed, his style or his message was of a religious syncretism. I don't agree with the term syncretism, but I think it's a nice shorthand to describe what he's doing. And his devotees, the Ravi Fakirs, recite his poetry as a shrine, mostly on Thursday evenings, but sometimes every single day. The shrine itself is here, that is the courtyard. The dome structure you see is where the dome lies. The courtyard basically faces one of the entrances, the other entrance is here. It was commissioned 2 years after his passing, by Muhammad Shah Al-Haro, and it's form of burnt bricks, stand on stone foundations, and glaze patterns and all that. I'm not really interested in architecture itself, so you can see I'm more interested in what architecture does. So, we're interested in this. So here you can see how architecture itself has evolved over time. So before it was just these red things, and the yellow comes in, then the blue comes in, and this is over the past 250 years. So we know that the meaning of architecture has changed. It is not what it was meant to be, or what the architect or the commissioner intended it to be. It has changed over time. Similarly, we see in academia that a lot of meanings of the space have changed. People have called it dome, sanctuary, masjid. You'll see in the dates that as we go or as we come near to today, meanings have changed. And more importantly, as Krishnamurti, Indian or Indic philosopher, has talked about, when you start naming things, you basically forget what the thing actually is. If you name a bird, the child stops looking at the bird, they go for the name. So when we start looking at the names of things, we forget the experience of things. So what my presentation or the intention is to look at the lived experience of the space instead of looking at the architecture and the meaning that we have from all of these names. Why is it important? One of the reasons is to check erasure. A lot of times what happens is when scholars are talking about South Asian architecture, they're talking in terms of the meanings they already have in scholarship. And more recent scholarship has told us that this being a very Sunni Muslim space, there are Shia practices, for example, the Asdari or the Shia mourning practices happening there. There are a lot of Hindus visiting this space. And if we go from a very Orthodox Islamic point of view, there can be only one Kaaba, but this tomb is being used as a Kaaba by people who cannot afford to go to Makkah itself. So all of these things start falling apart when we are considering very top-down perspectives. Now, how I'm going to do it? The first will be a construction of meanings. So there are, InGoal talks about many vantage points where scholars are occupying to create meaning. So I'll be occupying one of the vantage point, and that vantage point is a body-based heuristic. I'm looking at the human body or the many bodies that form a human body and how that can be reflected in architecture as well, or how that relates to architecture. And the second one, the poetics of place, I'll come to that bit later. So the idea of body, I'm taking this idea of body from Scott Kugel, who builds upon the idea of body from I forgot that name, Farid Zahi, if I'm correct, who builds on the idea body from Turner, from Lacan, and all of these Western philosophers, anthropologists, and other writers. Basically, the idea is that at the core is the physical body, the flesh and bones and everything. And as we move from the flesh and bones, we have a functional body or the biological body that's supporting that body. But without the flesh and bones, the functional body does not exist. And without the functional body, flesh and bones cannot exist. Similarly, we move on to the next stage, the third stage, that is the dynamic or the social body, where it's not just one body, it's multiple bodies coming together, so forming a community. And finally, the imaginative or interpretative body, which is something beyond that community. Of course, these are not exhaustive categories, but this provides us a framework of looking at the body. And of course, it's back and forth. It's not just one way, it's both ways. So when we talk of physical body, the flesh and bones, and we're talking about the shrine itself, for me, that physical body is body of the saint. If the saint's body is not there, the shrine cannot exist. Nobody will be going there if there's no body of significance there. And similarly, on the other side, the saint's body provides a religious, political, and social well-being for the devotees who are visiting that space. So there's a back and forth going on. And if we start talking about other constructions of Sufi or more saintly in nature, for instance, Kugel talks about the Sufi saints in Fez are seen as people with proximity to divine. Taylor talks about the idea of baraka or the potential that exists in these Sufi or saints' bodies. That's why people go there to receive their baraka. And most importantly, the idea of touching. You don't just receive baraka being in that space, you have to touch the body. How do you touch the body? You're touching the tomb, the architecture itself. So that baraka is relayed through touching, the physical meeting of the bodies. And when you start looking at these ideas, I think the body starts representing a door. So a doorway to the divine, you're touching the door, you're opening it, you're accessing the divine through that body. So it's a doorway between the physical and the metaphysical. And if the shrine's body is a doorway, then the shrine itself can be thought of as a wall, because without a wall, a door cannot exist. The shrine is a wall that is dividing the physical and the metaphysical, and the saint's body is the door you're accessing through. So in a way, that shrine starts becoming a periphery or a peripheral space, and there are evidences from academia that it can be true. For example, Davis and Cunningham talk about shrines being crossing points in South Asian region, where they are sort of gateways to more important places, to cities or courts of the kings. Similarly, Kugel talks about how these spaces are a passage to the divine, meaning that humans access the divine through these spaces, as well as the divine manifesting itself in the physical realm through these spaces. So again, starts becoming a liminal space. And if you start looking at what Elizabeth Gross, in terms of architecture, talks about, a lot of different combinations of practices that happen in a space cannot put a space in one box. So we cannot call it just a shrine or just a mosque or just a kanisa, just a synagogue, but different sort of practices that happen in the space sort of identify it as a liminal space, as an in-between to many different things that are happening. That's where the functional body comes in, or the devotees themselves, without which the saint cannot exist, without which the shrine again cannot exist. And the devotees here are doing many different practices. They're performing supplemental prayers. The space is being used for spiritual learning. Fakis are reciting poetry. They're coming here for barakah. So in that sense, it becomes one, a mashal, as Kugel calls it, being a space of witnessing the divine. And in other sense, it becomes a heavenly theater, or the divine witnessing the devotees. So there's an idea of darshan and didar going back and forth. So both the divine and the physical are coming together in this space. So in that sense, the imaginative body, the final layer, I think we can say, is the divine itself. But how to experience that divine? The dynamic body, that's where the poetics of place come in. Every culture experiences divine differently. So when we're talking about that divine or experiencing divine, the lens which you're adopting is a very contextual lens. So the idea of place, because the culture is placed, people are placed, there is a place, there's a way of looking at it. So that's why I'm picking out this idea of place. Of course, there are many ideas of place out there. Casey has written a very thick book. If someone can read it, it's amazing. The idea of place, it can be a whole field in itself. But I'm talking about three things, which I find very interesting. First, the idea of collective cultural work, the memory, and not just the memory, but the activation and layering. So if I'm going to a place that's activating a memory, and I'm layering my current experience on that memory. But what is that memory built up of? It's built of different narrative movements, different epistemological movements, geography and everything that comes with it, and entanglements of body, of science, of nature, of weather, of physical structure, everything being entangled in that moment. And of course, when you talk about movement, we talk about time. So time, as opposed to Western time, the Eastern time or other cultures think of time as a cyclical entity. The past is manifesting present, it's living present. So it's not a linear time, you're not going into the future, but you're going back and forth. So this idea of place is going back and forth in a certain space, which is creating that experience. You're creating that lens to experience the divine. So now, the second part of how would be a production of meaning here, because we're away from that side, we're not in the shrine right now. I'll be taking sort of the readership of the shrine, meaning I'll be the one, or I was the one, who was experiencing the shrine through my memories, through my experiences, and through my place in academia, meaning I have my foot down in both sides. So academically and sort of a believer's perspective altogether. Now, when I start doing that, I have three narratives that come to mind. One of Barzakh, not the Pakistani drama Barzakh, but it's a very intriguing drama. I'm not being paid for marketing, I promise. Barzakh, in a Muslim sense, is a space-time of grave. When you, after death, the body is there, the soul is there, body is disintegrating, but the soul is there. But on the day of judgment, we're all brought back together for, well, day of judgment. There are references in Quran, there's references by Smith and Haddad who talk about the anthropology of Islam. The second narrative that comes to mind is the Urs, the wedding of the saint. The death anniversary is the wedding of the saint to the sacred. The idea is every year there's a feast, a celebration at the death anniversary of the saint, which is considered the wedding of the saint to the sacred. There's singing, there's dancing, there's all sorts of festivities that happen around. And then one of my own, let's say, education from the IAS, comes this idea of Krishna Tulsi wedding, which is the idea again of the marriage of sacred and the human. Tulsi is a human person, Krishna is a sacred entity. They get married, they stay in a room called Bohabarghar, the natal room or the bride's natal house, and then they move after 9 days to the conjugal home, the heaven. So there is the idea of liminal space here as well. The Bohabarghar is a liminal space which is in the earthly realm before moving to the heavenly realm. When I start combining all these narratives together, I can say that, or I can try to say that the tomb itself is like a Bohabarghar, where the saint takes form of Tulsi, the divine takes form of Krishna, they are married in their death, they are staying there till the day of judgment where they move to their conjugal house. When we start looking at pictures of it, because again, it's a more pictographical idea or more lived experience. So from the top left or your top right, a very traditional marriage bed. This one is a Kohabar in the north of India, northeast or north of India. You can see a lot of decorative items there, floral patterns. And this is in the lower picture is from Thar or the region of Sindh, where women are seen sitting outside the similar sort of a place singing or celebrating the wedding. And then we start looking at the images of the shrine itself. So we have the saint in his sort of marriage bed, and the devotees and a lot of other people participating in the Urs or the marriage celebration. Reviewing that meaning, I'm calling upon Panofsky's iconology, which Shahab Ahmed also talks about in his late Shahab Ahmed also talks about in his book. The idea is to look at different aspects of the culture, different documents the culture has produced to check if the meaning is correct. And in this case, if I look at Jadwani's book, he talks about a sign that exists outside the shrine, which says that Bhitsha, the town, is Bhittai goat. Goat meaning groom, meaning the town is Bhittai's groom. That makes Bhittai the saint, the bride of the town. So that is not far away from what I'm coming at, meaning Bhittai being bride of the divine and Bhittai being bride of the land. And when we talk about a lot of more recent decolonial ideas of land and narratives, land turns out to be the more effusive or greater entity than people itself. In other senses, when we think of the practices of the shrine itself, you see women tying their head covering to the door of the tomb itself, hoping for blessings of the saint to have this, the husband as the saint has achieved. Similarly, newlyweds are brought to the shrine for blessings of the saying. So these sort of ideas already exist there. So it's not far away from the lived experience talking about meaning of the shrine in this sense. So concluding, when we start thinking of things in terms of lived experience, we stop thinking of the shrine as a Sindhi Muslim space, but as a South Asian place or South Asian phenomena. We move away from fixed meanings and start thinking about lived or changing meanings, because as I showed earlier, the meanings are changing through time. And we move from a bounded system to more shifting phenomena, because every person there is experiencing the shrine differently, being an outsider, insider, devotee, or me, myself, and people outside, like we are here, experiencing the shrine in a very different sense. So it's a shifting phenomenon. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Farhan. So we've heard three very interesting speakers talk about quite diverse topics, but I do feel there is something that does bring all three speakers and their topics together. So I'll try and ask a question and then I'll open it out to the audience. I wanted to ask you, all three of you could reflect on one thing. So all of you spoke about experiences of participants within a religious space. How would you, if I were to take your framework of intersectionality, they all have multiple identities. How would you take their other identities, and how do you think those identities are shaping or mediating or informing their experiences within the religious space? So I know that isn't particularly your focus, but based on your conversations or whatever you have come across, could you, all of you, just very briefly reflect on the intersectionality aspect of it and how that's mediating and informing their experiences? So whoever wants to go first.
I think I can go first. I hope everyone can hear me. So for my participants, how it affected them was that obviously one of the aspects was, I'm sorry, is that okay? Okay, perfect. So how that affected a lot of my participants was that they either did one of two things. They either chose one identity over the other. So when they were in religious spaces, they chose to completely abandon their sexual or their gender identity because they did not feel comfortable in that, comfortable in having both of their identities or living in both of their identities at the same time, or they used their multiple identities as an act of resistance, and went on to experience or live their religious beliefs or experience those religious beliefs while expressing their sexual identities as well. So it was one or the other for most of them. And one of the participants, specifically, I'll choose his example, is that he chose to experience both of his identities at the same time so that he could create a better space for other people who might have an easier time doing that, an easier time experiencing both of their identities or their multiple identities at the same time. So actively creating space as well.
Thank you.
I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, that's definitely. There obviously, if we had time, I would like to hear about the multiple identities, but this was definitely helpful. Okay. Akhil or Farhan, who wants to go?
I can.
Okay. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Go first, Akhil. Go on.
Sure. Sorry. Just to understand the question clearly, you're asking about how the different identities are intersecting within, for example, in this case, the context of, let's say, an Ismaili intensity. Okay. So, yeah, I think that's definitely plays a role. When we look at the Ismaili community in Tanzania, the community itself has multiple identities. So on one level, it's an Ismaili community. At the same time, it's part of a group of Asian communities. So you have this kind of colonial structure, especially where you have sorry, I just got a weird notification. You have this kind of colonial structure where you have, let's say, the European that's at the top, you have the Asian that's often again, acting as traders. And then you have the African who is sometimes perhaps not treated as well. And in many ways, the Ismaili community in that way and in other ways fits this sort of stereotype of Asians. Not completely, there are obviously exceptions, but that's definitely part of it. The other thing I'll mention is, and again, there's many advantages, and I happen to highlight that one. There's also many advantages to the Asian communities, supporting different institutions, many of these institutions that were built by Asian communities. I saw a question from Dr. Henley about whether these are exclusive to the Ismailis. They're not. You have also other institutions that are built by other Asian communities, hospitals and schools and so forth. But you also have another element of this, that the Ismailis are part of the country in which they live. So I mentioned that the Ismailis are also trying to build institutions to serve local populations. The AKDN is especially good, or especially a vehicle for this. And today the schools, the Aga Khan schools, the hospitals fall into that. And that's very much a way, I think, where the Ismailis are playing that identity as Tanzanian citizens as well. So I'm not sure if that addresses your question. And I've lost your audio, but.
Farhan?
Okay, so in my case, there are, okay, so the examples I gave earlier, so, is this better? How about that? Better? Okay, so the examples I was giving earlier, so one, the Azdari or the Shia practices, the site is a Sunni majority Muslim area, but also there are Hindus living there, but the Shia practices are, well, practiced by all of them there. So Sunnis are taking part in it, the Hindus are taking part in it, and the Shias are taking part in it. The second example I gave was the example of Bhil and Koli tribes, who are, some of them are now also Ismailis, but they were Hindus before. So they're also going to the saint, they're also looking for saint's blessing, being Ismaili as well, also looking for the Imam's blessing. And when I'm there myself, talking in terms of reflexive ideas, I'm also a Ismaili. But when I go there, I'm sort of saying that this saint is above my Imam. So there are different identities at play there. I think it's about, the experience itself is about how these identities are shifting very quickly. Me being a man, more privileged sex in Pakistani society, will experience it very differently as compared to anybody else, as compared to, let's say, a transgender or women or anybody else who's there. They're all experiencing, well, religious identities, sexual identities, maybe also how they're, in terms of ableism, whether they can even sort of access the site, because if you are not able to walk to the site, you cannot access the site. Someone has to carry you there. So that experience also changes. Walking towards the access to the site is actually very beautiful. There's roses everywhere. There's different kinds of smell of flowers, of food, of everything together. But if someone has to carry you, yeah. So someone have to carry you, they wouldn't be taking you from the main promenade, they'll be taking you from the side entrance. So the experience changes altogether. So a lot of these identities, of course, change and modulate the experience according to what sort of identity you can take at that certain point.
Thank you. Thank you. That was very helpful. We'll go to Uzair first.
Thank you. Thank you all for the very fascinating presentations. I have a question for Akil and for Farhan, and I'm sorry, Mashal, I missed your presentation. To Akil first, so before the nationalization, which we obviously know caused a lot of trouble and tension, I'm just wondering whether there were any tensions in the trends that you were describing before the nationalization project. So that is for Akil. And for Farhan, you mentioned that the fakirs sing Bhittai's poetry on Thursdays, at the Kalanda shrine, not very far from Bhittai. Every Thursday there's namaz. In our tradition, at least the Khoda Momna tradition, at least in Pakistan, regularly there is the Chogalia on Thursdays, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's something going on at the Amethi shrine nearby Bhittai on Thursdays as well. So what is it, one of the things I would like you to explore when you're there is what is it about Thursdays, or more specifically Jumeirah or Shabbat Juma, the Eve of Friday. What is it about the Eve of Friday that drives all of these things with all these different shines? And the other bit is, you were talking about bodies. And one of the ways the body is conceived of in the tradition is that it's very anthropocosmic. The human is, in some sense, cosmic. The human body is some kind of representation of the cosmos. So I wonder if that applies to the architecture of the shrine as well, right? And you talked about things changing over time. I wonder, maybe thinking of it as things are building over time instead of changing over time is a better way to think about it. And the final point about the shrine being a Sunni shrine, of Sunni space, and all kinds of people participating. Someone recently told me, I just come back from Karachi, and someone told me that they'd been to the Bhittai shrine, and the standard greeting there, no matter what band of faith you belong to, you say Ya Ali Madad, that's the standard. So I wonder if Sunni, Shia, all these categories even are relevant when we are talking about a place like Bhittai shrine. So thank you.
Akhil, you want to go first?
I can definitely take that first. So your question was about the tensions, or if there were any tensions prior to the nationalization, correct? I'm going to assume I got that. And Dr. Gilani, I cannot hear you. I cannot hear you.
Both of you could be brief in your responses so we
Sure.
can get other.
Sure. So to address some of the tensions really quickly.
If both of you could be brief in your responses, that would be very helpful.
For sure, for sure. So on the one side, I think we had tensions on the leadership, with the leadership throughout. So you have things like the concentration of leadership was with the wealthy, even from the beginning. There's red tape, bureaucracy within the community. So there's tensions on that side. There's also tensions politically. So you have, for example, just before the nationalization, you have the Zanzibar revolution, which caused problems for the Ismailis in Zanzibar. Even before that, even the process of the independence, right? All of a sudden, the social structure is flipped. So now it's the Africans that are, leading. And so there's a lot of grievances that the Africans have, not just against Ismailis, but against the Asians who had been their overlords for some time. And so that causes definitely some tensions, which perhaps, let's say, culminate in the nationalization. So I hope that answered your question briefly.
Akhil, over to you, Farhan.
Thank you, Zaid. These were actually quite very, very, very interesting questions. So yes, when I'm there, I'll think about Thursday. Right now, I'm not very sure why it is Thursday, but it's everywhere across the board. Thursday is very important.
Ismailis.
Exactly. So it's there across the board. And one very interesting thing that I came across was the poetry of Shah Latif might be something that was not used as a framework, but was also coming into Ginans itself. So there's some scholar, I'm sorry, I don't remember their name, who has also talked about Shah Latif's poetry coming into Ginans itself. The thing you talked about, anthropocosmic, a lot of people, when they talk about human body in Islam and human body as the shrine's body or the mosque's body, there are a lot of different arguments where the body has to be complete, the body cannot be broken, and it's the man's body that's being talked about. So anything, a scratch on the body or losing a limb or anything, that leads to a problem. That person cannot be regarded as a complete body. So yes, there are certain arguments there, but I don't really subscribe to those arguments, but yes, something that I can look at in future. I don't agree with the idea of building. Reason being, building means that you're continuously putting things up. But here I'm talking about meanings that are being lost as well. Lost or let go, whichever you want to think about, but it's not always lost. Sometimes it's culturally or community-wise significant to let some meanings go. For example, in Ismailis, we have let go of certain terms in our Ghanans because they were not relevant anymore, or we were trying not to make them relevant anymore. So yes, some things that need to be let go. So I don't really agree with the term building here. I like the term changing because it's flux. It's always in movement. So movement is, I think, better. Relevance of categories, yes, I agree with your point completely. So when I was talking about Professor Asani's idea of religious syncretism, I don't agree that it's about syncretism because it's more about the lived experiences. All there, the whole category is a top-down thing. Categorizing or taxonomical categories are top-down, saying, oh, this is Sunni, this is Shia, this is this is that. I don't think that actually exists on ground. Everyone is one. When you go there, they say Yali Madad, they say Salam. Sometimes you'll also hear Inshallah from a Hindu person. So it's all there. It's a part of the vernacular that we're talking about. Vernacular has no categories. Vernacular is lived experience. So yes, I think that is very important, that whenever we are talking about these things, we understand that these categories itself are a, let's not say Western, but an external framework that we are thinking in terms of. And if we keep thinking in terms of these categories, we're making the same mistake we are trying to challenge. So yes, it's important to realize that, but again, sometimes we are stuck in those categories. You know, Heidegger, being here, stuck, what can we do?
Thank you, Farhan. Thank you. Shall we? Okay. Can we?
I have a question for the first presenter. I did not catch your name. I'm sorry.
Mashal.
Mashal. My name is Lila. I'm a new postgraduate student at UCL, and I'm a Fulbright scholar from the United States. And my understanding of intersectionality is that having multiple marginalized identities can create or result in more discrimination for that individual. So in your research, you have individuals in New York who are queer, woman, maybe immigrant, family, a person of color, and they're Muslim. And therefore, the risks or the severity of discrimination can be much higher for that individual. So I was just wondering if you ever analyzed the community's experience within like the context or framework of discrimination or white supremacy in America, because we have systemic racism and prejudice there. So and we're not a homogenous society. So for example, like in any of your interviews, did like concerns about safety or discrimination came up when they're considering maybe coming out to their family or to their community?
So yes, I did. I just didn't have enough time to put it on the presentation, but yes, that did come up. Intersectionality in the terms of their own migrant status and how the migrant status of their parents as well, or their families, did come up. A lot of the people who were first generation immigrants, or even first generation immigrants, and the time that they had spent in the US also affected how safe they felt coming out. So again, people who were first generation were the ones who were the most hesitant to come out to their parents. But people within the US, a lot of the first generation immigrants that I talked to were also students who had come to New York for their studies. So their experiences with people outside the Ismaili community, but within the greater New York community, or even the queer community in New York, also was affected by their immigration status or by white supremacy. So for example, one of the people mentioned that when they went to a queer event in their university, they were the only brown person there. And so they were asked questions about how can a Muslim be queer? And so they faced those challenges as well.
Thank you. Very fascinating. Omar, can we take the mic to Dr. Omar?
Thank you. A question for Mashal and one for Farhad. In a sense, you have unconsciously brought some more binaries to your trying to kind of dispel binaries, and one of them was that you had perhaps two main categories, one being religion, the other one being sexuality, I think, although you did mention, multiplicity of identities. One thing that you haven't abounded on was the ethnic or ethno-linguistic belonging of the people. There is an assumption that there is brownness or coloredness of some kind. In your experience, you did allude to the different backgrounds or different waves of migration and so on and so forth. But I wonder if there is something to be looked at in terms of the different, ethno-linguistic groupings to which people belong. And to Farhan, thank you for taking us on this out-of-body experience and transporting us over there. It was wonderful. I want to ask, you did mention the kind of orthodoxy as a kind of concept. I want to ask you, what is the resistance or the tensions in the region from, I don't know, the ulama, the imams of the mosques who might be saying to people, don't go there, this is not right. On the one hand, and on the other hand, is there a movement or in your mind or in other people to go back to some kind of original state of what I sense that there was you mentioned a sense of loss of meaning, but are you alluding to not only a sense of loss? So you in a sense you are celebrating the addition of new meanings, but I wonder if there are people who are lamenting the fact that things have become something that were not supposed to be initially, something that you did mention. Thank you.
Thank you, Omar. Thank you. Mashal, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So very quickly, Dr. Umar, I do recognize that I did limit it within sexuality and religion. And I would love to talk to you later about how different sexualities, over coffee, yes, of course, like how different sexualities are affected by religion, because that did come up but again, because of time constraints. And yes, so all of my participants were of South Asian descent, so I was limited in that sense. And I do acknowledge that that's a huge limitation, but unfortunately, because it is a minority group within another minority group, it was really hard for me to find participants who were diverse. I did try to find as many people as possible and as diverse as possible. Unfortunately, that was not possible for me, so I do recognize that is a challenge. And in future, I would love to explore how different ethno-linguistic experiences are, like how different people experience these in their context.
Thank you.
Dr. Umar, amazing questions. First, about resistance and tensions in the region. Yes, there are some tensions. That's why it's very difficult to organize a field research in that area. I have to be very careful when I'm going there. But more importantly or more interestingly, very recently, and not exactly sure of the date, the Gilani or the gate holder or the key holder, whatever you call that, the person was blamed or outed as a gay person. So the person had to seek asylum in Europe somewhere. So he's not even in the shrine anymore. So there are these tensions, of course, not just to the idea of saint veneration, but also to the idea of saint being a man. So again, that leads to the second question, going back to the original state. So the original state, the saint or the follower or anyone, leader should be a man. So of course, these ideas also link to that, because since this person is not a man, cannot be the Gaddi Nashin, we cannot follow this person anymore. So I think there are certain ideas like that. With the thing about lamenting what it used to be, there's nothing of that sort in my head that something used to be, because I believe if something is not, it was not because the community did not want it to be that way. There's an organic change of meaning, there's organic loss of meanings through time. If we continue holding on to a certain meaning, it was meant for a different context, and time now is a different context and time, so that would create a problem. But on ground level, I don't know yet. I haven't been to the site as a researcher, as a scholar as yet. I've been to the site before as a, let's say, enthusiast, but so I wouldn't know what the situation was there. But the idea of preserving music is still there with Coke Studio and everything, so we should preserve the music in a very specific way. I don't agree with it, because you're actually destroying music trying to preserve it, because you're putting so many microphones, so many different types of studio music as compared to shrine music. There's a very interesting article by Huang Pailing, talks about fakir versus fankar. So fakir being a devotee, fankar being a musician. So there are certain tensions there as well. So yes, there are some people who are lamenting that. There are other people who might not be. Funkars are ones who saying, it's fine, we can go out, sing, get some more money because we need to take bread home. Other people being fakir saying, no, we should just be fakir, we cannot be funkar, that's blasphemous. So yes, I'm sure there are these tensions present on site, and I'll find more when I go there. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you. That was fascinating. Omar, you obviously didn't expect to hear the whole debate of Funkar and Fakir.
I have a question for Farhan and then for Akil. My question is, you showed us some pictures and there were women very active in this shrine. How is the percentage or the presentation of women, gender specific? Is there any economics or other issues? This is important that they go to the shrine. That is one question. And the other question is, what is the role of colors? They were very colorful, the building and the, what is color and spirituality? Is there any combination between them, or that is like that? And my question from Akil, you said that young people leave Tanzania. I would like to know how is the relationship done between the young people who maybe have better jobs, better situation, and to go back to their home country, Tanzania, with the family. What is the continuing life of these people? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question. So first, reason for women going to the shrine. I don't know of any economic reasons as yet. I might find out when I go to the shrine itself, but there are of course more spiritual or more physical reasons, because the idea for women going there is to get a spouse or a husband like the saint God, the divine husband. So sort of that social standing in a way, or more emotional aspect of it, going to that shrine. There might be other economic reasons, but from the top of my head, I can only think of women being in the stalls which are selling roses or rose petals and some other things there. That might be one of the economic reasons. About color and spirituality, I came across one article which talked about it, but I'm not exactly sure how they were linking color to spirituality. From my own experience and knowledge, the color is coming from the tile itself, which is particular to that region, the Hala region. So the blue glaze tile and the orange, they're the colors of the region itself. So not just this shrine, a lot of different shrines have the very similar colors. So I'm not sure exactly what it has to do with spirituality. It might just be about the context of construction, the context of architecture, or the context of whole production of this sort of meaning of shrines, that they're adding such colors to it. But there might be other meanings attached to it, but I'm not really sure of those meanings actually. So sorry about that.
Thank you. I understand we run out of time. We do have some questions online, so I don't know if there is any scope to take them or we have to close.
So did you want me to comment?
Thank you, Mashal, Akil, Farhan, and Dr. Halani.